welcome back to another advanced topic area. This is part of our data warehouse or data strategy series. In this episode, we're going to talk about project glossaries versus model-based glossaries. I need to talk about this as a dependency to the reporting part of this series and should have covered this in the beginning, as glossaries are critical to any project. The Sparx Enterprise Architect Project Glossary and model-based glossaries serve similar purposes but differ in structure, functionality, and use cases. The project browser was introduced back in version 7, around 2007, and it is a centralized dialogue-based list for defining terms and their meaning with an EA project. The cool thing about them over the years has been that we can treat them as reference data and export the XML to be used in other projects. However, while the model-based glossary, and I'm stuttering because I call them MBGs, model-based glossaries, were introduced back in release 15.1 around 2019, model glossaries allow users to define glossaries within the model structure. In MBGs, each term is treated as a standalone class. These elements allow for the same benefits and extensions that other elements in Sparx share. So let's get started. This is going to be hopefully a short subject. I've tried to take a few hours of content and get it into the shortest possible video for you as I can. So let's start with project glossaries. I sometimes will refer to them as project-based glossaries. And let's just go to the design tab and then go over to glossaries. And this is a glossary for this project. Now, this is getting unwieldy. It's getting a little bit out of control, but it is what it is. And project glossaries are best for small to medium-sized projects. This has become a large project split across a program with multiple releases. So they're good for teams that prioritize ease of use. So anyone can come over to the glossary, right-click in here, hit add, and then add a term. If there's no governance, though, there's nothing stopping from adding duplicate terms, especially when we get into acronyms. Acronyms are killers, and you could have an acronym, 2 or 3 that have the same acronym that mean completely different things. So how do you rectify that? And we're going to talk about that in this video. And finally, they're good for projects requiring basic documentation without deep model integration. So they're very simple to use. And when you're getting into architecture design, let's go to a particular element. You'll see over here in notes, as you're going along and coming across various terms, you'll see this is underlined. So this is defining what a platform is, because when technical people are talking with non-technical people, we sometimes refer to frameworks, platforms, and applications, which some people think mean the same thing, and they do not. Now, a platform and an application are probably closer. A platform and a tool are probably closer. But when we're talking about frameworks, we're not necessarily talking about platforms. All right. So being able to define your terms in a centralized glossary is extremely important. However, when you're starting out, you may have a dozen or so, and then after a while, they become very unwieldy. They can get very verbose. They can get very long in defining what items are. Next, let's talk about model-based glossaries. And again, they were introduced in 2019, version 15, and I'm on version 17 now, build 1704. So this glossary, let's go ahead and go to it. It's in our document repository in this project. This is the second release. The previous project was the first release, and it used the project glossary. And in the second release, we removed the project glossary and moved to a model-based glossary to support the delivery effort. So if we go to glossaries, we have a model-based glossary. And if we look over in the browser, I'm going to bring it out over here, you can see that we have various categories that we're covering and terms within those categories, such as acronyms. And we'll certainly talk about acronyms more. There's best practices either way. I prefer that they're under the category, data analytics, data science has a bunch of acronyms that are used, and it might be better to have them under the category, but we have them in their own category, simply called acronyms. So these are treated as glossary categories in here, and under each category, there are various glossary entries representing various terms. So let's take a look at that. Let me go back to my original view, and let's go ahead and open up data analytics. So in this example, we folded the terms underneath their own category. So if we get into business science or mathematics and data science or platforms and tools, let's go ahead and look at platforms and tools. We'll go ahead and open it. You can see it's opening in a list, in a specification view. There's so many things that you can do with model-based glossaries versus project glossaries that it would take too long to cover. So in different areas, I'll be covering implementations and best practices around glossaries to be used throughout various projects. So there's different use cases and approaches. So in this particular case, we're looking at this glossary, and you see a lot of terms that are underlined. And if we just mouse over them, they expose the term just like in a project glossary to what it is. And it tells you if you control click the item, you would go to directly to its meaning. And if you allow your modelers, they can actually edit this term. But there's a lot more to what you can do in model-based glossaries. So let's go to where this is located. So what I'm going to do is change the view back to graphical, right? And we're going to right-click to where it's located. So you can see it's its own category. And then here we have taken the class element and we have changed the appearance to enable info view, which you've learned in the channel. Otherwise, the item comes out as a class element, and you can see how large this item is. I got stuck in there. There we go. And, that's kind of hard to read and understand. So what we're going to do is pull it back, undo, and put it in info view. This way we can expose what the status is. These are all proposed terms, what version as they're moving through various governance and best practices applied by the shop, the company. And you're able to manage your glossary, your terms, your intelligence much easier, faster, and proficiently across all of your project domains. And then this package structure here, this can be exported and shared across projects. So what are the pros and cons to using a project-based versus a model-based glossary? So let's start with the pros and cons for project glossaries. First off, the pros are simplicity of ease of use, centralized access, they're lightweight, integration with documentation, and legacy support. In other words, if you've got teams that are on older versions of Sparx, all the way back to version 7, you're able to reuse that glossary in their thick client implementation. The cons are limited structure. I mean, it is a flat file list. There's no model integration, basic functionality. As you can see, all you can do is, you can, when you're managing them, is right click in here, add new. You can certainly select them, delete, and print a list of them and do things like that, which are things that you can do in model-based glossaries as well. However, governance becomes a problem in dealing with the maintenance and challenges relevant to a project glossary. So therefore, they're less flexible for collaboration. I mean, if you right click on this item, there's no collaboration. People can't ask questions about it. Modelers and other subject matter experts can't communicate. With a model-based, you get all of the benefits of the elements in here. You can do discussions, you can do reviews, journal entries. You can manage the life cycle of this knowledge element just like any other element within your modeling environment. Next, let's talk about the pros and cons of model-based glossaries. The pros are rich structure and relationships. There's so much that you can do with these elements. You can draw relevance, traceability to other model elements, any model element across the project. Most importantly, when you're doing requirements development, you come across a term, you can draw relevance, dependencies on terms, and we'll show that later on in project delivery videos, but that's just enough on that pro. I could talk a long time on that one. Model integration. You can take these elements and integrate them with other models. You can literally move them between namespaces. I would not suggest that. But for reporting purposes, often you want to grab these as building blocks to add to a particular conversation or presentation. So therefore, they're highly customizable, and that's very important. They're also highly scalable, and they support collaboration and versioning. You can see in the info view, we're sharing the version of a particular term. And we're going to talk about governance in just a moment, but this becomes mission critical when you're managing your terms, your methods and procedures, as well as any other intelligence within your company. I mean, knowledge management systems can become very complicated themselves. Sparx makes it easy to manage your definitions and your terms, as well as the content and data underneath any element. And then finally, they're compatible with Project Glossary. So let's go ahead and expand this. Let's go to design, and then let's go over to Glossary. All of these are showing up within this glossary. Now there's some mixed terms in here. There's a duplicate, viewership. There is a glossary element. See, it's a model item, and it is true. These that are blank mean that these are glossary terms that are still in the project that need to be removed. But the first thing the governance team is going to do is select this. Well, how is it defined? Between that one and this one, which is part of business architecture, this was a business type, business architecture, they're the same thing. So makes it much easier to manage. It's a huge pro. Your glossary, as they get rather large, right? The cons are complexity. It's not easy for modelers to understand how to create terms. I actually think that's a pro because if you allow people to just create terms in real time without any type of governance or review, things can get out of control, like you just saw a moment ago. Someone added viewership, then someone came back across and added viewership again, and they shouldn't do that. You introduce the class element just like you would any element to a review board. It would move in status from proposed to approved, and then eventually it would move to validated and then implemented. Ultimately, you want to see, I'm going to cancel out of this. No, I don't need to save it. Ultimately, you want to see everything here with a status of implemented. It's been approved and it's gone forward. But for demo purposes, these are all set to proposed. We did that using Kanbans, covered it in another session, and I'll get more into the governance process of any element as we move forward in the channel. Now, they also have higher overhead because they are model elements. That comes with a higher amount of overhead, processing resources, data storage. Let's go to start Let's go to search. Model search is good enough. Let's go to my custom because I've created some SQL for this. And let's look at glossary. So there's glossary and there's model-based glossary. Let's start with glossary. So in this particular case, we're going to open up the SQL. These terms are managed in the T_glossary table in Sparx. And I've talked a little bit about this. So if we run this, we can see all of the terms that are still in this project that need to be removed. So if we go to other SQL and we look at model-based, so model-based, go up here to the top, glossary, you can see that we're looking in the T_object table, like I've talked about before in the channel, all class elements, requirements element, any object in Sparx, UML object, is stored in the object table. So in this particular SQL, we're parsing that table and we're looking for stereotypes with glossary entry. So if we run this one, we see a different output of the glossary terms that are created here. And then we get all of the power of search. We can turn on and off fields. We can filter, all sorts of things. Now let's go ahead and close this. Back to this particular example. And another con here outside of the learning curve is potential for overcomplication. I think that if you don't have governance in place, review boards, best practices, and processes for introducing intelligence in the company or into the shop or yourself, that you can overcomplicate how you're dealing with your terms, the amount of terms. Like for instance, in this particular case, we presenting acronyms. Let me go ahead and launch this in list form. And typically, when we're looking at a model, if I go out of this, I'm going to change views back to graphical. How you get to a list view is go to the diagram properties and then always open in specification view. I have that turned on. You can open in these other views, but if none of these are checked, it's going to open up in the diagram view. And again, all of these have been changed from class elements to info views to make it easier. Otherwise, they can become unwieldy eye charts that you're trying to present and manage in a particular view. We are always open in specification view. So this is a better way of managing your data and your metadata. You've learned about specification views in here. You have the ability to add and remove fields that you want to look at. In this particular case, we customized it. We want to see version. We want to see the author. Most important in understanding who owns the term, who's managing the life cycle of that term. And then, of course, we want to filter by stereotypes. And in this particular case, it's already filtered. And then we want to know the status. And all of these should be proposed because we converted them for the demonstration. So as they're moving in status, you can manage your status here. Now only allow your review board to do that and so on. So let's go ahead and close this, but try not to overcomplicate this one's already fairly complicated. Business architecture, managed the same way, same practices, right? Close this one. Data analytics, though, we thought it was so broad that we wanted to break out business science and the terms that are used in business science versus mathematics and data science versus platforms and tools. This can become very complicated, especially when you're dealing with data science, because you have a lot of terms that you want to ensure the various stakeholders, even in your data science group, you've got data scientists, you have data analysts, you have DBAs, all of them need to align on the terms when they're working together within the same shop. You have database administrators that are probably a little older and not following the terminology in the data science and artificial intelligence field. So this one can become overcomplicated if there's not an agreement and a best practice going forward. And I'm going to stop going through the rest of them, but Don't overcomplicate it. And then the other con is its dependency on model. So that simply means that, well, it's dependent on the fact that you're building a model. If I go back to my original view here, out of this widescreen view, you're dependent on managing this model. So that can be a con, if I don't think it is, but it could be as you're moving forward. We're going to start wrapping up now. I told you it's a broad subject, takes a long time to cover. I've just skimmed the surface of what we want to talk about and do. We're going to do another video, a little deeper dive on design before we get into reporting. There's a couple of subject areas that the team and some of you have asked for, so we'll try to get into that. The Project Glossary offers simplicity and accessibility, but it lacks the depth and flexibility that the model-based glossary approach has. So the latter, model-based glossary, provides a powerful modeling capabilities and integration at the cost of increased complexity and setup effort, but well worth it. The choice depends on the project's scale, team expertise, and need for model integration. For hybrid needs, EA's ability to synchronize model-based terms with Project Glossary allows the team to leverage both approaches as needed. However, the example that I shared with you is that the old Project Glossary was blended with the model-based glossary and polluted the environment. So you need to start clean. You need to have governance in place before you start introducing terms to any specific project, and manage your model terms, your entries, the same way you'd manage any other model element in Sparx. So I hope this episode was helpful for you. And until the next one, happy modeling.